Welcome to the Security on Cloud podcast, brought to you by Anitian, where cloud security and compliance are top of mind. Join the conversation with your host, Scott Emo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. You're listening to the Security on Cloud podcast live on Anitian Radio, and I'm your host, Scott Emo. You may notice that this episode sounds a bit different than past episodes. My co-host, John Vecchi, has moved on to pursue other passions of his. And for all of us here at the podcast, we wish him well on his future endeavors. But not to worry, I plan on keeping the Security on Cloud podcast information flowing to make sure that you have the latest on what's going on in the world of cloud security. And so we don't miss a beat on that information flow. We have a great topic for you today. There's always been speculation that the global COVID-19 pandemic forced many IT departments into a scramble and forced the issue of many cloud application migrations, often way earlier than planned, to support ongoing business operations in their companies. But to what extent and to what benefit has always been a guess, well, until now. Anitian and the Ponemon Institute teamed up and implemented a study to help quantify exactly this. And with that, let me introduce our guest for this episode. He's the chairman and founder of the Ponemon Institute and is considered a pioneer in privacy auditing. He was appointed by the White House to the Data Privacy and Integrity Advisory Committee for the Department of Homeland Security. He was appointed to the Advisory Committee for Online Access and Security for the United States Federal Trade Commission. He was also appointed to 2 California state task force on privacy and data security laws. He earned his PhD at Union College and a master's at Harvard University, and attended the doctoral program in system sciences at Carnegie Mellon University. Coming to us from Northern Michigan, I'd like to welcome our guest, Dr. Larry Ponemon. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you, Scott. What a wonderful introduction. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to have you here today. So,
thank you.
Larry, before we get started, on the whole report and everything, sure. I have to figure that most of our listeners have read your research at one time or another in their careers.
I think so.
I'm pretty sure. I bet that that's a pretty good guess, and I'm sure that they've heard of the Ponemon Institute, but they likely have never heard from you directly. So you have a ridiculously impressive background, and I didn't even scratch the surface on that in that intro. So let's, if I could just take one thing out of that whole thing,
sure.
Could you share with our readers and our listeners here, what is it like being a data privacy and integrity advisor for the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not a politician, so working for the government had its good days and bad days. On the bad day side, there would be points of disagreement with the professional politicians. And a good day, you would basically get through it with a smile on your face, find a nice pub, usually, to enjoy yourself after a day from hell working on all sorts of issues. But there's always something interesting. And our government is shifting and changing right now on a bunch of issues that affect privacy, data protection, and security. And we'll see what the country looks like in a couple of years.
Yeah, well, that's politics, isn't it?
That's politics.
Well, you know what? Let's instead of talking politics, let's get to it. Let's go and get to the report that we published
sure.
together. It's called the post-COVID cloud boom. All right, can you tell us a little bit about the concept of the study and what we were trying to find out?
Exactly. Well, we wanted to study what's referred to as a cloud boom during the pandemic, because it was our belief that organizations were hit pretty hard with COVID-19. They didn't really know exactly how to respond and what controls they needed to have in place from an IT and IT security perspective. And the general theory was that the changes that required made organizations grossly inefficient. And our hypothesis was actually pretty bold, because we said, that's malarkey. Why would an organization decrease its security and privacy and other activities in IT? And in fact, we believed in our proposition or hypothesis that some organizations, the good organizations, would see this as an opportunity to shift and change in a very positive way and have better security as a result. Those were that was our main hypothesis. And you'll see later in the conversation that is in fact what we found.
Great. Well, so the boom part refers to the growth in cloud services on multiple fronts, and I think we're going to probably cover those. So, but before we go into it specifically, who did you survey to try to get all these insights? Like, what are some of the demographics and titles we talked to before we get into it too far?
Sure. Well, the study was pretty complex. It contained actually 2 independent samples or groups. One, about 643 individuals in IT and IT security. Most of these people had experience of more than 5, in fact, mostly 9 or 10 years on average. So we had people who were really experienced in IT as well as in security, and security being a little bit more broad than IT. But in general, we had some people who really knew this stuff. The other sample, a much smaller sample, involved CISOs, people who are C-level executives in most cases for their organizations who lead security and IT and cloud and a whole bunch of other activities. So the combination of these 2 samples gave us insights into what was really going on.
That's great. And so we actually hit multiple levels in a company, those that were actually doing the work, and getting their hands dirty, and the folks that were making the decisions. Exactly.
These were people who weren't afraid to step up and do what was right for their organization. We do a lot of studies, and politics, again, in IT and IT security can be pretty severe. The people who lead IT and IT security, they know it needs to be done, but they're afraid if they bring it to their boss that they're going to get into trouble or be a whistleblower in their own company. You don't see a lot of forward movement, positive movement, but this was a different story or scenario. Just because the consequences were so significant, everyone was potentially getting sick. Organizations didn't know about quarantine, or if they did quarantine, how could they ensure that it was being done properly? All these things made most people very sick mentally, as well as probably physically with the virus itself.
Yeah, and things were changing every day, right?
Every day.
The information coming out was every day, and they had to react, but many times they didn't know how to react. So
exactly,
it was very interesting times we the entire world went through.
Oh, I know.
Well, so given the report, were there any big ahas that stood out to you in the report?
Sure. Well, we found that business growth actually increased. Better and more sophisticated uses of cloud technologies occurred over the period of almost a year and a half during the pandemic years, at least overlapping pandemic years. And so the theory that this is going to cause businesses to suffer and decline did not bear out. In fact, we see the opposite, that business growth actually increased pretty significantly during most of the pandemic year. So that was, I think, a aha moment where, we were looking at the data and we said, let's run the survey, the data once or twice in our technology. And we got that same result, that business growth actually increased. Also, business risk, which is the analog to business growth in our model, actually did not significantly increase, which is, you always worry about, well, we have a higher mean, but a much higher standard deviation. And the reality is that organizations were doing a good job on growth and also a very good job on risk containment. The combination of the two actually changed the perception that this is a nightmare forever, and most companies are going to suffer as a result. There was no evidence of that, at least in our survey.
All right, and so I think I heard three different kind of overall findings in there. Increased business growth, business risk or improved security posture, and actually financial strength for some companies.
Right, exactly. On the financial side, we estimated kind of a high worst case scenario of the cost of the event at about 13 or 14 million. But if they were doing this in a cloud environment rather than on premise, the savings would be about $4.3 million. So there was actually cost savings in some cases by allowing organizations primarily to work from a home office or a remote location. And that in and of itself made organizations much more efficient and much more likely to invest in cloud technologies. We saw that across the board in all the industries. We looked at 14 different industry sectors in the study.
Wow. Well, so let's back up for a minute and kind of start to drill down on those findings.
Sure.
So you actually you actually took the last one first and kind of drug down a little bit more about the greater financial strength.
Right.
Is there anything more about that area that I mean, that's pretty amazing that improved financial strength of a lot of the businesses out there.
Right.
Was there anything else that was interesting in that kind of that section of the AHA?
Sure. The other part of that was that organizations, because they realized that they were operating more efficiently and effectively in many cases, they're making more and better investments in cybersecurity technologies, specifically encryption, tokenization, and other tools that protect data specifically were being made by organizations because they ended up having like a surplus. At least they thought they had a surplus as a result of cost efficiencies. And we saw this across the board, but the primary focus was to protect data. And that data would be normally in encrypted mode and would include intellectual property. So organizations were very sensitive that during this time, that you wouldn't want bad guys hacking into your systems and doing damage that could happen to any organization, but especially during the cloud boom.
That's really good. That's really good. So you'll be so improved financial strength and it kind of drilled down to a number of different areas, and we're kind of weaving in and out of the three areas, and it's because they really are interconnected. It's kind of hard to piece out the three takeaways that you got because they are so interrelated. You mentioned improved cloud. Well, you mentioned business risk did not necessarily go up, and you could do the inverse of that and just say companies had improved security posture. You gave some good examples of that, like improved encryption and other pieces of the puzzle that they may not have had before, but they implemented, that's goodness for the entire industry. Yeah,
absolutely true. A lot of organizations, they were, maybe a little bit shy and did not feel like they wanted to make big investments during this period because of the risk that by being too open about what you're doing from a security perspective could be dangerous, that you're tipping your hand to the bad guy, which is true, not this during a cloud boom, but this is probably true for any organization with any technology, and especially those that are focused on cloud. But we basically found that the whole idea of risk management changed because we're dealing with people who are operating in a completely different environment, working from home, and not necessarily having the training or policies to make that a safe situation. So there were cases that, where the system was broken a little bit and had to be repaired. But in general, as I said before, business growth up, business risk down, technology investments made at a much higher rate than expected. And this was true across the board, across 14 different industry sectors. So we really looked at it from a very different angle. When you do research, sometimes the gem is not the direct finding, but the interrelationship, the covariant relationships. And so we ran about 100 across, more than 100, I'm sure, crosstabs. I was starting to dream at night at crosstabs. But it resulted, I think, in some very interesting findings that we will continue to write about in the future.
Well, you also mentioned in there, and I know in the report that there was increased not only security but increased remote worker productivity,
right?
Because you were kind of forced remote, right? I mean, sure. Because the pandemic forced people inside, and so we were able to increase, and I think that showed up in the report as well.
Right,
be able to increase worker productivity. By X percent. I don't know what the percentage, but we did find that was helpful as well. Exactly.
We did a derivative study to this one, but we were looking at, again, the efficiency that organizations experience when they migrate to the cloud environment, not just the pandemic. And we found that this home workplace scenario was greatly improved the efficiency of individuals in the workforce. There's no question about that. In the study, just our study alone, looking at that, one of the crosstabs, we estimate that productivity went up by as much as 37% in some industries. Worker productivity went crazy, and still is, if you look at it dollar for dollar, it's still higher than what happened in the olden days when we went to an office, especially a stodgy office, wearing a business suit and a vest. And not nowadays with communication, very few people come to work with gym shorts. So our productivity did change because we could do wonderful meetings like this without having to get in a car or take a plane somewhere.
Which both of us may or may not be wearing gym shorts right now.
I am wearing gym shorts right now.
and that's awesome. And that makes a lot of sense too, because like commute time. My commute is was downstairs and to the right. Right. I mean that was the limit of your commute, and
I love it.
And so all that commute time is gone. So the part of worker productivity might be just the time that you save from simply the commute.
That's right.
Yeah. So it was really interesting stuff. This is great. Well, so I think it's probably safe to say that we've been definitely able to quantify that there was actually a cloud boom due to the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
Would you say?
I would say that, and it's kind of an interesting finding, maybe a little weird for some people, but the general idea is that you can have the crisis that's enormous problems for an organization or a country, region of the country, and people are smart. They figured out how to make this work. Not in every case, but in many cases. And it's hats off to organizations that do this, that are brave enough to step out and do it better than or first in line. And we see some organizations are really very clever and very smart at dealing with these issues.
Well, and we found out that in the report that more companies were on that positive side than on the negative side.
Yeah.
Hence the name of the name of the report.
Right.
So after the crazy years of COVID-19, and we're not quite done. I think there's still some. I sure hope we're done, but boy, there is truly a silver lining in that cloud.
There is. There really is.
And by the way, pun intended there.
It's a good pun, by the way. That's very good.
Well, Larry, are there any other pieces in the report that you would like to bring up? Because we covered a lot of the pieces there, but I know you did a few other offshoots. Are there anything else that our listeners might be interested in hearing?
Oh, that's great, Scott. We have a report that we think is pretty neat, and we'd like to give you a copy of it if you don't mind. So, Scott, if you can help us get that report out to people listening, that will be great. One last finding: it's be cool, enjoy life, and don't necessarily follow the fear factor. That I think is one thing that organizations that did this well basically did it better than any other organization, because they were confident. And they basically implemented security in a way that was more effective and efficient. So we want organizations and people and companies to be brave and not to be afraid of pandemics, even though we're most likely to see that happen again if we're unlucky.
You heard it first here, Larry Ponemon saying, "Be bold, be brave."
That's right.
Go out there and do that cloud security thing to the best of your ability.
Thank you,
Larry. Great discussion. Thanks so much for joining us today. If our listeners want to find the full Ponemon post-COVID cloud boom report, you can download that at www.anitian.com/Ponemon. And Larry, if our listeners want to get in touch with you or look at any of the other reports, many thousands of reports that you've done either recently or in past years, where could they go?
Well, probably the research at Ponemon.org. Ponemon is not Pokemon, it's Ponemon @org. And so research at Ponemon.org. And we're very lonely here in Northern Michigan. So when people request a telephone call or a meeting, we are very happy to accommodate. Thank you, Scott.
And with the remote workers, that's going to be easier this time than before. Well, remember, the Security on Cloud podcast is brought to you by Anitian, the leading cloud security and compliance automation provider, delivering the fastest path to security and compliance in the cloud. Thanks again to our guest, Dr. Larry Ponemon. And until we meet again, I'm Scott Emo. See you next time on Anitian Radio.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Security on Cloud podcast. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe so that you can join us again for another episode. And for tips, show notes, and more episodes, check us out at Anitian.com. See you next time.